The sun was setting over the vast expanse of red earth and cactus-strewn land, casting long shadows across the desolate plains. The widow's well stood silent beneath the waning light, its wooden frame weathered by years of neglect and countless scorching summers. It had been there for as long as anyone in Dust Hollow could remember. A simple, unassuming structure that drew water from deep below the surface, but it carried a reputation darker than the night sky above. People whispered about it when they thought no one was listening, their voices hushed like secrets shared between conspirators. Some said the well brought bad luck. Others claimed it was cursed. But only those who ventured close enough to hear its faint murmurs at midnight knew the truth, or so they believed. For years, the tale of the widow's well remained untold, buried under layers of fear and superstition. Until now, in the small frontier town of Dust Hollow, life moved at a slow pace dictated by the rising and falling of the sun. The days were filled with backbreaking labor, plowing fields, tending cattle, repairing fences, and the nights offered little more than rest beside crackling fires. Yet even among such monotony, there existed stories that lingered on the tongues of men and women alike, passed down through generations like heirlooms. One such story centered around Clara Bennett, known simply as the Widow. Her husband, Thomas, had died 3 years prior in an accident involving a runaway horse team. Since then, she had lived alone on the outskirts of town, maintaining the modest ranch they had once called home together. She worked tirelessly, her hands calloused and her spirit hardened by grief. Yet her neighbors avoided her whenever possible. They spoke of how strange she had become since Thomas's passing, how her eyes seemed to peer straight into your soul. Clara's isolation deepened after rumors began circulating about the well behind her house. At first, these tales were dismissed as nonsense, the ramblings aboard cowboys looking to stir trouble. But then came the sightings. A young boy swore he saw blood-red water spill from the bucket when Clara drew it up late one evening. An old prospector claimed he heard screams echo from within the depths of the well during a moonless night. And though many scoffed at such accounts, few dare approach the property without good reason. Little did they know, the truth was far stranger and darker than anything they could have imagined. It all started with the drought. That summer, the heavens refused to weep, leaving the land parched and cracked. Rivers ran dry, crops withered, and livestock grew thin. Even the hardy souls of Dust Hollow found themselves praying for rain, their faith tested by the relentless heat and despair that settled over the region like a thick blanket. For Clara, the drought meant hardship beyond measure. Without water, her crops would fail, her animals would suffer, and her livelihood would crumble. Desperation drove her to dig deeper trenches, haul barrels from distant streams, and ration every drop she could spare. But nothing seemed sufficient. Then, one sweltering afternoon, as she stood gazing at the barren fields surrounding her ranch, an idea struck her. Why not use the well? She hadn't touched it since Thomas's death. In fact, she had deliberately avoided it, fearing the memories it evoked. But desperation has a way of silencing fear, and Clara steeled herself against whatever ghosts might linger near the ancient structure. Armed with a rope and a sturdy bucket, she approached the well just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. As she lowered the bucket into the darkness, the familiar sound of splashing water filled her ears. Pulling it back up, she peered inside and saw a clear, cool liquid shimmering in the fading light. Relief washed over her, followed quickly by guilt. Was it wrong to feel grateful for something so ordinary? She shook off the thought and set about filling jars and containers, determined to make the most of this unexpected bounty. But as the weeks went by, strange things began happening. At first, it was subtle. The water tasted slightly metallic, but Clara chalked it up to mineral deposits deep underground. Then came the color changes. On some mornings, the water appeared perfectly normal. Other times, however, it took on a reddish hue, almost like diluted wine. This alarmed her, but not enough to stop using the well altogether. After all, what choice did she have? What truly unnerved her, though, were the sounds. Late at night, when the desert winds howled through the canyons, Clara sometimes swore she heard whispers emanating from the well. Soft, mournful voices calling out in languages she didn't recognize. Once, while standing near the edge, she thought she caught her own name being spoken. Though whether it was real or merely her imagination playing tricks on her, she couldn't say. Despite these oddities, Clara continued drawing water from the well. She needed it too desperately to let superstition stand in her way. Besides, the water always tasted fine, regardless of its appearance. Or so she told herself. Word of the peculiar happening soon spread throughout Dust Hollow. Neighbors began noticing improvements in Clara's garden despite the ongoing drought. Her horses looked healthier, their coats gleaming under the harsh sunlight. People grew curious and suspicious. How could someone survive so well when everyone else struggled? A group of townsfolk decided to investigate. Led by Sheriff Jenkins, a grizzled man with a penchant for solving mysteries, they rode out to Clara's ranch under the cover of darkness. Their intentions were noble, to ensure Clara wasn't hiding illegal supplies or engaging in activities harmful to the community. But their arrival stirred unease in the air. When they reached the well, they paused, taking in its dilapidated appearance. Weeds grew unchecked around the base, and the pulley system groaned loudly with each movement. One brave soul volunteered to lower himself into the shaft, armed with a lantern and a rope. As he descended, the others waited anxiously above, exchanging nervous glances. Minutes stretched into eternity before the man re-emerged, his face pale and his hands trembling. He refused to speak, handing the lantern to Sheriff Jenkins instead. Inside, the flame flickered weakly, revealing faint traces of crimson along the stone walls. Unbelievable as it seemed, the well itself appeared stained with blood. Panic rippled through the crowd. Whispers turned to shouts, accusations flew thick and fast, and before long, tempers flared. Some demanded Clara be questioned immediately, while others insisted the well be sealed forever. Amidst the chaos, Clara emerged from her house, her expression calm yet resolute. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said firmly, though her voice betrayed a hint of fear. "That well has provided me with water, nothing more." But the damage was done. Trust had eroded, replaced by suspicion and mistrust. From that day forward, Clara became a pariah, shunned by the very people she had once called friends. Months passed, and the situation worsened. Clara's attempts to explain the phenomenon fell on deaf ears. No amount of reasoning could convince the townsfolk otherwise. They viewed her as a harbinger of misfortune, a woman tainted by forces beyond comprehension. Some even accused her of witchcraft, though such claims remained unproven. Through it all, Clara endured, clinging to her independence and resolve. Yet, deep down, she harbored doubts. Had she made a mistake in relying on the well? Was there truly something sinister lurking beneath its surface? These questions plagued her nightly, keeping her awake as the stars wheeled overhead. One fateful evening, driven by curiosity, or perhaps madness, Clara decided to confront the well head-on. Equipped with a lantern and a shovel, she descended into the shaft, determined to uncover the source of mysterious phenomena. The journey downward was arduous, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. Shadows danced along the walls, cast by the flickering light of her lamp. Finally, she reached the bottom. There, surrounded by damp stones and tangled roots, lay a hidden compartment carved into the rock. With trembling hands, she pried it open, revealing a collection of artifacts, rusted knives, fragments of pottery, and a single leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellow with age, the ink faded but still legible. As Clara read the entries, her world shattered. The journal belonged to none other than Thomas Bennett, her late husband. In it, he chronicled a dark pact he had made with an unknown entity in exchange for prosperity. The well served as both a conduit and a prison, binding him and now her to its will. Tears streamed down Clara's face as realization dawned. The water's changing colors, the whispers, the inexplicable vitality, it all stemmed from the sacrifice required to maintain the bargain. And though she hated herself for it, she understood why she had never felt truly alone since Thomas's death. The final chapter of Clara's story unfolded swiftly. Confronted with the truth, she faced an impossible choice: destroy the well and risk losing everything, or continue living under its shadow. Ultimately, she chose neither. Instead, she vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a note pinned to the door of her house. To whoever finds this, it read, Beware the promises of the desert. They come wrapped in lies, buried in secrets, and drenched in blood. Years later, travelers passing through Dust Hollow still spoke of the widow's well. Some claimed it ran red again, though no one dared approach it anymore. Others swore they heard laughter echoing from its depths, mingling with the cries of lost souls. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of human understanding, Clara watched, waiting. The lantern's flame flickered violently as Clara stood frozen at the bottom of the well, her breath catching in her throat. The journal trembled in her hands, its words etched into her mind like scars. Each entry was a testament to Thomas's desperation, his willingness to bargain with forces he could barely comprehend. She read of rituals performed under the light of a blood moon, offerings made to an unseen presence that promised wealth and prosperity in exchange for something unspeakable. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she flipped through the brittle pages. Little did she know, the answer she sought would only deepen the mystery, and perhaps seal her fate. One passage, written in hurried, frantic handwriting, caught her eye. It whispers now, calling me by name. It knows my fears, my desires. I cannot turn away, though every fiber of my being screams to run. What have I done? Clara's fingers tightened around the journal until her knuckles turned white. This wasn't just about water. It was about control, power, and sacrifice. The well wasn't merely a source of life. It was a prison, holding something ancient and malevolent beneath its surface. And somehow, Thomas had unleashed it. Above ground, the wind howled to the desert, carrying with it the scent of dust and decay. Clara emerged from the well long after midnight, her clothes dampened by condensation and her spirit shaken to its core. The stars above twinkled coldly, indifferent to the turmoil below. She staggered toward her house, clutching the journal tightly, as if afraid it might vanish if she let go. Inside, she lit a fire on the hearth, the flames casting eerie shadows across the walls. Placing the journal on the table, she stared at it for what felt like hours, her mind racing. Should she destroy it? Burn it along with any evidence of the pact her husband had made? Or should she delve deeper, uncovering the full extent of the curse? Her decision came not from logic, but from fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of losing everything she held dear, and fear of the voices she swore she still heard echoing in her ears. With trembling hands, she poured kerosene over the journal and tossed a match onto the pile. The pages ignited instantly, curling inward as the flames devoured them. For a moment, Clara thought she saw faces in the fire, faces that screamed silently before vanishing into ash. But the burning of the journal did little to quell the unease within her. If anything, it seemed to awaken something dormant. That night, as she lay awake in bed, she heard footsteps outside her window. Heavy, deliberate steps that circled her house, accompanied by low, guttural growls. When she peeked out, all she saw was the endless expanse of desert, stretching out like a sea of sand under the pale glow of the moon. Days turned into weeks, and Clara found herself trapped in a cycle of dread and denial. The well continued to provide water, but now it carried a heavier burden. Its red tinge appeared more frequently, sometimes so dark it resembled fresh blood. The whispers grew louder, too, spilling into her dreams and haunting her waking hours. They called her name, not as a friendly greeting, but as a command, demanding her attention. One morning, as she drew water, she noticed something unusual. A small, jagged stone rested at the bottom of the bucket, its surface engraved with strange symbols. At first glance, they looked random, meaningless scratches. But upon closer inspection, Clara realized they formed a pattern, a map of sorts, leading somewhere far beyond her ranch. Curiosity, or perhaps madness, compelled her to follow the markings. Equipped with a compass and supplies, she set out into the wilderness, leaving behind the familiar confines of Dust Hollow. The journey tested her resolve, pushing her through scorching heat during the day and freezing temperatures at night. Along the way, she encountered signs that confirmed her worst fears: abandoned campsites littered with bones, carvings identical to those on the stone etched into rock faces, and faint traces of crimson seeping from the earth itself. Finally, after days of travel, she arrived at her destination, a hidden canyon shrouded in mist, its entrance marked by two towering stone pillars carved with the same symbols she'd seen on the stone. As she stepped inside, the air grew thick, oppressive, as if the very atmosphere resisted her presence. Deep within the canyon lay a cavern, its mouth yawning open like a beast waiting to devour. With her lantern held high, Clara ventured inside. The walls were lined with ancient paintings depicting scenes of sacrifice and worship, their figures distorted and grotesque. In the center of the cavern stood an altar, its surface stained with dried blood. On it rested another stone, this one larger and more intricately carved than the one she carried. As she approached, the whispers returned, louder and clearer than ever before. They urged her forward, promising salvation if she completed the ritual outlined in the carvings. But Clara hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to flee. She thought the townsfolk who had shunned her, the isolation she endured, and the weight of the secrets she carried. Was this truly her path, or was she simply another pawn in a game older than time? In the end, Clara chose defiance. Refusing to succumb to whatever force controlled the well, she smashed the stones together, shattering them into fragments that scattered across the cavern floor. The reaction was immediate and devastating. The ground shook violently, sending rocks crashing down from the ceiling. The whispers transformed into deafening roars, and the air filled with a blinding light. When the chaos subsided, Clara emerged from the cavern, battered but alive. Behind her, the entrance collapsed, burying the altar and its secrets forever. Though she knew she hadn't eradicated the entity entirely, she had weakened it, denying it the opportunity to spread further. Returning to Dust Hollow, Clara discovered that the well had changed. Its waters ran clear once more, free of the crimson taint that had plagued them. The whispers ceased, replaced by the gentle rustling of wind through the sagebrush. Yet Clara remained cautious, knowing full well that some mysteries are never truly solved. Years later, when travelers asked about the widow's well, the townsfolk offered conflicting accounts. Some claimed it brought good fortune, while others insisted it harbored evil. But one thing remained constant. Clara Bennett, the woman who faced the darkness head-on, became a legend in her own right, a reminder that even in the Wild West, where courage and resilience defined survival, there were forces no amount of grit could conquer. And so, the story of the widow's well lived on, whispered among campfires and passed down through generations. But then, little did they know, it wasn't truly over. The dust of the desert clung to Clara's boots as she trudged back toward Dust Hollow, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had done. The canyon behind her now lay silent, its secrets buried beneath tons of rubble. Yet the echoes of that unearthly roar still reverberated in her mind, a haunting reminder of the power she had dared to challenge. She knew she had not destroyed the entity entirely, only delayed its inevitable resurgence. But for now, the well was at peace, and so too was the town. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Clara paused to take in the view. The world stretched out before her, vast and unyielding, much like the struggle she had faced. Her journey had been one of solitude, marked by loss and resilience. Now, as she returned to the life she had built, she wondered if anyone would believe her story, or if they would simply dismiss it as another tall tale from the Wild West. Back at her ranch, Clara found herself drawn to the well once more. Its wooden frame creaked softly in the morning breeze, a sound almost comforting after the horrors she had witnessed. Kneeling beside it, she drew up a bucket of water, marveling at its clarity. No trace of red remained. No whispers disturbed the silence. It was as though the well itself had been cleansed, freed from the burden of the pact her husband had made. Yet Clara couldn't shake the feeling that this tranquility was temporary. Hidden forces rarely stayed dormant forever, and she understood better than most that the line between safety and danger was thinner than a blade's edge. Still, she resolved to live each day as fully as she could, cherishing the moment of quiet contentment while preparing for whatever might come next. Life in Dust Hollow slowly began to return to normal, or as normal as it could be in such a rugged land. The townsfolk, ever superstitious, avoided mentioning the widow's well outright, but cast furtive glances in its direction whenever they passed by. Some whispered among themselves about Clara's disappearance into the desert, speculating on whether she had sought redemption or merely run from the truth. Others admired her courage, seeing in her a reflection of their own determination to survive against all odds. Clara paid little heed to their gossip. Instead, she threw herself into her work, tending to her crops and animals with renewed vigor. The water from the well nourished her fields, bringing forth lush harvests that defied the harsh climate. Her horses grew strong and healthy, their coats gleaming under the sun. And though she remained an outsider in many ways, there was a quiet respect in the eyes of those who crossed her path. But even as she rebuilt her life, Clara kept watch. Every night, she sat by the window, lantern lit, listening for sounds that might herald the return of the entity. The desert winds carried strange noises sometimes, howls and cries that seemed almost human, and she never let herself fall completely asleep. She had learned the hard way that complacency could lead to ruin. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and rose, Clara received an unexpected visitor. A young man, barely out of his teens, approached her ranch on horseback, his face pale and his hands trembling. He introduced himself as Samuel Carter, a prospector fresh off the trail, seeking refuge from the elements. His story was familiar enough. Dreams of fortune had lured him west, only to leave him stranded and penniless in the unforgiving wilderness. Moved by pity and perhaps curiosity, Clara offered him shelter for the night. Over a simple meal of beans and bread, Samuel spoke animatedly about his adventures, his voice filled with youthful enthusiasm. Clara listened politely, nodding at the appropriate times, but her thoughts wandered elsewhere. She wondered how long it would take before the boy realized the dangers lurking just beyond the visible horizon. As the hours passed, Samuel grew quieter, his gaze drifting toward the well outside. Finally, he asked a question burning in his mind. "Ma'am," he began hesitantly, "I've heard stories about this place. The well, I mean. They say strange things happen here. Is any of it true?" Clara hesitated, weighing her words carefully. Then, setting down her fork, she met his eyes with a steady gaze. "Some truths are harder to bear than others," she replied softly, "and some lies are easy to swallow. All I can tell you is this. The world is full of mysteries, and not all of them want to be known." Samuel frowned, clearly unsatisfied with her answer. But before he could press further, a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, extinguishing the lantern flame. Darkness enveloped the room, broken only by the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the cracks in the shutters. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, from somewhere outside, came a low, mournful cry, a sound unlike anything either of them had ever heard. Samuel jumped to his feet, reaching instinctively for the revolver holstered at his side. "What was that?" he demanded, his voice shaking. Clara rose slowly, her expression unreadable. "Something you shouldn't concern yourself with," she said firmly. "Stay inside tonight. Let me handle whatever comes." Without waiting for a response, she grabbed her rifle and stepped out into the night. The air was cool, carrying with it the scent of approaching rain. In the distance, lightning illuminated the sky, casting fleeting shadows across the landscape. Somewhere nearby, something moved, a figure cloaked in darkness, its presence both menacing and sorrowful. Clara raised her rifle, her finger hovering over the trigger. But then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished, leaving behind only the echo of its cry. Shaken but resolute, Clara returned to the house, closing the door firmly behind her. "You're safe here," she told Samuel, her voice firm despite the turmoil within her. "For now." Days turned into weeks, and the entity did not reappear. Whether it had retreated deeper into the earth or simply bided its time, Clara could not say. What she did know was that her vigilance could not wane, not now, not ever. The well stood as both a symbol of hope and a reminder of the price she had paid to protect it. And so, the legend of the widow's well continued to grow, woven into the fabric of Dust Hollow's history. Those who believed in its curse whispered warnings to newcomers, urging them to steer clear of its waters. Others dismissed the tales as mere folklore, dismissing Clara's caution as paranoia born of grief. But Clara knew the truth. The well ran red when she drew water alone because it recognized her, A keeper of secrets, a guardian of mysteries best left undisturbed. And though the voices had fallen silent for now, she understood that their absence was merely a prelude to something greater. But then, little did they know, the desert holds many secrets, and not all of them stay buried forever.